Hi everyone, my name is Brittany J. Jones. Mimi G has asked me to step in while she's away to record the sew alongs for her new Simplicity Spring patterns. In this video, we're going to be sewing Simplicity 9268 and we'll be following along with view B on this pattern. Let's get started. Again, we're going to be sewing along to Simplicity 9268. You can see right here at the top that I have a different number, which is R10991. You may have this same number if you got the pattern from the top of the display. So instead of getting the pattern from the drawer, I just grabbed the one that was on top. However, if you open up the pattern and look at the instructions, you will see that it's the same number, 9268. Now let's look at fabric options for this pattern. On the back of the pattern envelope, you will see they have some suggested fabrics here that will work well for these two garments. You also have some notions, so you will need some thread and 1/2 inch wide elastic. Let's go over the pattern pieces that you will need to make view B on this pattern. The first pattern piece to cut out would be pattern piece number 8. This is the front. You will need to cut 2 out of fabric. You will also need to cut out pattern piece number 9. This is the back. You will need to cut 2 from your fabric. Pattern piece number 10, this is your pocket. You will need to cut out 4. Pattern piece number 11, this is your front casing. You will need to cut 1. Pattern piece number 12, this is your back casing. You will need to cut 1. You will also need to cut out pattern piece number 13. We're not cutting this out of fabric. We'll cut this out of elastic. This is your leg elastic guide, and you will need to cut 6. For fabric, I will be using this linen, which is in the color burnt orange from Melanated Fabrics. Let's get started. To get started on our pants, the first thing that we're going to do is take one of the fronts and back, place it right sides facing, and we're going to stitch the inner leg seam. You can see that I've gone ahead and finished off my inner leg seam as well as the crotch curve. That's just a personal preference. You can do it before or after. So I'm just going to find my notches, pin there, and then just pin the entire inner leg seam. When you get down toward the bottom of your pant, you should have transferred 2 markings. I'm going to place a pin at both markings, making sure that I go through the other side also. And continue pinning. After you have the inner legs pinned together, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using a 5/8 of an inch stitch. Down here at the bottom of the pant where we have the 2 markings, we need to leave the space between it open. So we can back stitch here at the hem, stitch up to the dot and back stitch. Again, leave this space here open, start back stitching here, back stitch, and then stitch all the way to the top of the inner leg seam. We're going to do the other side the exact same way. Remember to back stitch at the beginning of the stitch and also when you get to the dot. I'm going to put my needle down right at the marking and begin stitching. Once you have sewn your inner leg seam, you want to go ahead and press that seam open. So now I'm going to match up the inner leg seams and pin them together with right sides facing. Once you have your center seam pinned, we can go to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And to reinforce this center seam, we're going to stitch over that same stitching again, just to reinforce it again at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now that we have sewn our center seam, next we can go ahead and sew on our pockets. So here are my pocket pieces here. One thing that I like to do before installing the pockets is to go ahead and serge around the curved edge. And so with right sides facing, we're going to take a pocket. You should have transferred a notch. You want to match up your notches and pin there. And pin the remaining of the pocket in place. You also should have transferred some circles that match up to the dots that are on the pan. So just line up your dots, pin there as well. And just go ahead and pin on your other pockets the same way. Once you have all 4 pockets pinned on, you can go to the sewing machine and we're just going to stitch them on using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. After I have mine stitched on, then I'm going to serge and finish off the raw edge of the side seams. Backstitch at the beginning and the end of your stitch, and again the seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch. You can go ahead and stitch your other pockets the same way and finish off the raw edge. Once you have your pocket sewn on, you want to go ahead and press your seam facing toward the pocket like so. On the front 2 pockets, you want to do a row of understitching right here beside the seam. With understitching, again, just make sure that you have your seam facing toward the pocket. And you can see I've stitched maybe about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. So do that to the front 2 pockets only. After your understitching is done, now we can go ahead and sew our side seams. So with right sides facing, you want to lay your sides together. You should have transferred 2 dots. I'm going to go ahead and pin through my dots just to make sure I have those lined up. And now I'm just going to pin the remainder of the side seam as well as my pocket. Once you have your side seam pinned, you want to go to the sewing machine. We're going to begin stitching up here at the top. Be sure to back stitch. Stitch down to your first dot, back stitch there. We're going to leave this open for our pocket. Start back stitching at your second dot all the way down to the hem of your pants, and then you want to stitch around and close your pocket. Let's go ahead and do that now. Once you have your side seam and your pocket sewn, you want to go ahead and clip the back seam allowance only just right below the pocket like I've done here. And you can see I was able to press my seam open once I clipped this back seam allowance. Then you want to press your pocket going toward the front. Grab some pins, and we're just going to pin the pocket to the front of the pants. Now we can go to the machine and do a basting stitch just to keep our pockets facing toward the front. Once we have the pockets basted going toward the front, for our casing piece, which is pattern piece number 11 and pattern piece number 12, you want to go ahead and put them right sides facing, and you want to pin along the side seams. On one of the sides, you should have transferred 2 markings. We're going to do the same thing that we did with the pants earlier by back stitching and stitching to 1 dot, back stitching there, leaving the opening between the 2 dots, starting back stitching at the other dot all the way to the other end. And on the side that does not have a dot, we're just going to stitch straight down. The seam allowance for both sides is a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, so let's go ahead and stitch the casing now. Once you have the side seams of your casing sewn, you want to go ahead and just press those seams open flat. Next, we're going to fold the casing in half with the wrong sides facing. Just going to fold it like so. From here, you can go to the sewing machine and do a basting stitch to hold your raw edges together. For me, I'm using a linen, so I'm just going to give it a good press. It's holding a press well. But again, if you have fabric that may be a little bit difficult to press, you can go to the sewing machine and do a basting stitch to keep the raw edges together for your casing. All right, now that we have our casing either ironed or basted in place, now we're going to go ahead and attach it to our pants. So with raw edges even, you want to place it over the pants, but you want to make sure that you have this opening facing out toward you. If you have it on the inside, then after it is sewn, your opening is going to be facing out. So again, make sure that the opening is facing toward you right now. You want to line that up with the side seam and go ahead and start pinning in place. Once you have the casing pinned on, you want to go ahead and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and then finish off your raw edge. Now that the casing is sewn on, you can see I finished off my seams with my serger and I pressed the seam going down toward the pants. The next step is to go ahead and create our 3 rows of stitching so we'll be able to insert the elastic. So to do that, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to be sewing from this finished top edge of the pant, of the casing here. We're going to stitch over at a 5/8 of an inch, and then from this edge, we're going to stitch over 1 1/4 inches. So again, from this edge, we're going to come in 5/8 of an inch and stitch, and from this edge, we're going to come down 1 1/4 inches and stitch to create the 3 separate casings for the elastic. So let's go ahead to the machine and do that now. Now that you have stitched and created the rows on your casing, you want to go ahead and cut your elastic. You want to measure around your waist plus 1 inch and cut the elastics to that length. You can see here I've added safety pins on the ends of all 3 because I'm going to insert them at the same time. If you do them at the same time, it gives you less of a tug of war and just less problems if you did them one at a time and then it starts to gather up and then you try to insert the other. So we're going to do this all at the same time. So go ahead and find your opening. And we're just going to begin inserting the elastics. Okay, so just begin to pull the elastics through all together. This may be a little time consuming, but it's best to do it this way again as opposed to just doing one at a time. All right, now that we have all 3 of the elastics pulled through, you want to go ahead and try on your pants at this time and adjust your elastics if you need to. Maybe you need to tighten it. Go ahead and try it on now. Once you're happy with the fit, we can go to the machine and go ahead and secure the elastics in place. To do that, just remove your safety pins and you want to overlap the ends of the elastic. Make sure that it didn't twist while you were bringing it through. And again, just overlap the ends. Secure the elastics and do that for the other 2. Now that we have our elastics secured, you can distribute the fullness within the casings. The next step is to go ahead and grab a needle and thread, and then we'll just stitch these 3 openings closed. I'm going to save that to do for last. So now let's go ahead and start working on the hem. For the hem, you want to go ahead and press up along that fold line. I've already pressed mine, and I also pressed in 1/4 inch on that raw edge, press that under as well. So this is what my hem looks like now. So now we can go to the sewing machine. You want to stitch close to this inner fold. So go ahead and stitch there. In the same way that we stitched for the casing, we're going to stitch for the hem. So from this finished edge, you're going to stitch in 5/8 of an inch. Then you're going to come back to the finished edge and stitch in 1 1/4 inches. That's going to create the 3 casings down here for the hem. I've already done this side. So again, go ahead and fold up your hem, fold up the 1/4 inch, stitch close to the inner fold, and then stitch on your 3 rows to create your casing. Once we have created the rows on our hem, it should look like this. The next step is to go ahead and grab pattern piece number 13, which is our elastic casing. You want to cut 6 the length of this guide. So I have my 6 cut. Here are the first 3 that I'm going to use. We're going to do the same thing that we did for the waist casing. We're going to feed these casings through at the same time. So go ahead and find your opening, put your safety pins in, and just start to feed them through at the same time, just like we did for the top casing. Once you have the elastic pulled through at the hem, you want to go ahead and secure it by lapping the ends over, stitch it in place, and then you want to do the same thing to the other hem. Once you have that done, just do your slip stitching for the hem as well as up here at the waist casing, and then you will be all done with your pants. Well, that is all for this sew along, and I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below, and be sure to tag Mimi G Style on social so that she can see and share your makes. Until next time, blessings everyone. Bye.